D.B. Cooper. He bought a one-way ticket. He paid in cash. He sat in the back of the plane and ordered a bourbon. Then he handed a flight attendant a note that said he had a bomb. On November 24, 1971, a man calling himself Dan Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle. He was wearing a black suit and a black tie. He looked like a businessman. After takeoff, he handed the note. He showed the attendant a briefcase with wires inside. He demanded $200,000 in cash. He demanded 4 parachutes. When the plane landed in Seattle, he got the money. He got the parachutes. He let the passengers go. He told the pilots to fly toward Mexico. Slow, low altitude, wheels down, cabin unpressurized. Around 8 in the evening, somewhere over the dense forests of southwest Washington state, the rear stairway of the plane was deployed in mid-flight. D.B. Cooper jumped. The pilots felt the pressure shift. They knew the moment he stepped out of the door. He was wearing a thin suit, ordinary loafers, and he was carrying cash strapped to his body. The temperature outside the plane was below freezing. The drop zone was rugged wilderness in the dark. The FBI launched the largest manhunt in American aviation history. They found nothing. No body, no parachute, no briefcase. In 1980, an 8-year-old boy on a family camping trip dug into a sandbar of the Columbia River and pulled out 3 bundles of decaying $20 bills. The serial numbers matched the ransom money exactly. Just under $6,000. The rest of the money was never recovered. The FBI officially closed the case in 2016. They could not identify him. They could not confirm he survived. They could not confirm he died. A man got on a plane, walked to the back, and stepped into the dark. And nobody, in 54 years, has ever come close to telling us who he was. The first thing the radar operators noticed was a single bright contact moving over Lake Superior at 500 miles per hour. It was not on any flight plan. It was not responding to any identification request. Then a second blip appeared on the screen, climbing fast to intercept. That second blip was Felix Moncla. He was a 26-year-old first lieutenant in the United States Air Force, stationed at Kinross Air Force Base in northern Michigan. The night was clear. The lake was frozen. He was in the cockpit of an F-89 Scorpion interceptor, with his radar operator Robert Wilson in the back seat. Ground control vectored him toward the unknown contact. Moncla climbed to 8,000 feet over the lake. He closed the distance. The 2 blips on the radar screen got closer and closer. Then they merged. 2 blips became 1. The ground crew expected the merged blip to separate again, to show Moncla's jet passing over or under the contact. Instead, the single object continued moving across the screen for a few seconds. And then it disappeared. No descent profile. No explosion signature. No transponder pattern. The radar simply lost the merged contact entirely. The Air Force launched the largest search in Great Lakes history. Boats, helicopters, Coast Guard vessels. They covered the surface of Lake Superior for weeks. They never found the F-89. They never found Felix Moncla. They never found Robert Wilson. The official report concluded, decades later, that the unknown aircraft had been a Royal Canadian Air Force C-47 transport plane that was off course. But the Canadian crew of that C-47 said something strange. They said they never saw Moncla. They never registered any contact on their own radar. They never heard a radio call. They never noticed anything at all that night. A jet fighter and a propeller transport approached each other on radar over a frozen lake. 2 blips merged. And only the C-47 came home. Major Glenn Miller boarded a single-engine plane in heavy fog on December 15, 1944. He was 40 years old. He was the most famous band leader in America. He had walked away from a recording career that earned him millions to enlist in the Army Air Forces because he wanted to play for the soldiers. The fog over the English Channel that morning was thick enough that almost every flight had been grounded. Miller climbed into the back seat of a small UC-64 Norseman aircraft from a Royal Air Force base in Bedfordshire, headed for Paris. There was a pilot. There was one other passenger. There was Glenn Miller in his uniform with a small suitcase. The plane took off into the fog. Air traffic radar lost contact within minutes. There was no distress call, no mayday, no engine failure pattern, no flare. The plane vanished from the screen as cleanly as if it had never existed. The Allies searched the channel for weeks. They searched the French coast. They searched the British coast. They searched in the spring when the ice broke. They searched in the summer when the sea was calm. They never found a single piece. Not a wing, not a piece of fuselage, not a uniform button, not Major Miller's wedding ring, which had been engraved with his wife's name. Theories grew. The plane hit ice and went down. The plane was struck by friendly fire from Allied bombers dumping unused ordnance over the channel on their return from Germany. The plane simply got lost in the fog and ran out of fuel. But the English Channel is not the Atlantic. It is shallow. It is heavily trafficked. It has been mapped, dredged, and fished for centuries. Things that go down in the channel come back up. Glenn Miller did not. The most recognizable American voice on the radio took off into a wall of gray, and the war kept going, and the music kept playing, and he simply did not come back. He had written the most beloved children's book in the French language the year before. He was 44 years old. He had been told he was too old to fly. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry argued his way back into the cockpit anyway. In July 1944, he was flying reconnaissance missions for the Free French Air Force, mapping German troop positions in occupied southern France. The Little Prince had been published in New York the year before. He had not lived to see it printed in his own country. On the morning of July 31, 1944, he took off from a base on the island of Corsica in a P-38 Lightning fighter aircraft. He was alone. The mission was a photo run over the Rhone Valley. He was scheduled to return in 6 hours. He never came back. There was no distress call, no Allied radar contact lost, no German fighter encounter reported in his sector that morning. The aircraft simply did not return. For 56 years, no one knew what happened. France mourned. The world mourned. The Little Prince became, somehow, his own memorial. In 1998, a fisherman near Marseille pulled up a silver bracelet from the seabed. It was engraved with Saint-Exupéry's name and the address of his American publisher in New York. In 2000, divers located fragments of a P-38 Lightning buried in silt at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. Serial numbers confirmed it was his plane. The wreckage showed no signs of combat, no bullet holes, no structural failure that could explain the dive. The plane had simply gone into the sea. His body was never found. In 2008, a former German fighter pilot came forward and claimed he had shot down a P-38 over that area on that day, but the wreckage did not match his account. The man who wrote "What is essential is invisible to the eye" climbed into a fighter plane on a bright summer morning and flew into the Mediterranean, and what he saw before the end, only the sea remembers. It is not an aircraft. Those were the last words of a 20-year-old pilot named Frederick Valentich. He was an inexperienced pilot with 150 flying hours. He was on a routine training flight from Melbourne, Australia to King Island, across 120 miles of open ocean called the Bass Strait. He was alone in a small Cessna. It was October 21, 1978, just after 7 in the evening. About halfway across the Bass Strait, Valentich radioed Melbourne Air Traffic Control. He sounded calm. He said there was an aircraft above him. He asked if there was any known traffic in his area at 5,000 feet. The controller said there was none. Valentich said the aircraft had 4 bright lights. He said it had just passed over him at high speed. He said it was now circling above his plane. He said it was orbiting. The controller asked him to identify the aircraft. Valentich could not. He said it had a long shape. He said it was metallic. He said it appeared to be playing some kind of game with him. He said it was hovering. His engine began to misfire. His final transmission was recorded clearly. He said the aircraft was now directly above him. Then he said the line that has been studied for 47 years. "It is not an aircraft." After that sentence, the radio went silent for 17 seconds. Then there was a strange metallic scraping sound, like grinding, and the transmission ended. Frederick Valentich was never heard from again. The Royal Australian Air Force launched an immediate search. They covered hundreds of square miles of ocean. They found no debris, no oil slick, no flotation gear, nothing. In 1983, an engine cowling washed up on an Australian beach. It was identified as belonging to a Cessna of the same model as Valentich's plane. The serial number range matched the date of his disappearance, but it could not be conclusively linked to his specific aircraft. The official investigation by Australian authorities concluded that the cause of disappearance was unknown. A young pilot looked up. He saw something. He told the world it was not an aircraft. And whatever was orbiting above him in the dark over the Bass Strait that night has never been identified, never been explained, and never been found. If you made it this far, like the video and subscribe. More cases are coming.